Martin of Tours, who would have imagined that a Roman soldier would become one of the most venerated saints in France. Born in Siberia, in the region of Pannonia, around the year 318, Martin's life was destined to be extraordinary. Although his family was pagan from a young age, he felt an inexplicable connection to something greater than himself, a light that guided him even in the darkest moments. His story is one of faith, sacrifice, and miracles that continue to inspire thousands of people. Martin grew up surrounded by strict Roman customs, under the authority of a military father who expected him to follow in his footsteps. However, his spirit was different. It is said that even as a child, when he saw someone in need, he felt an irresistible urge to help. His mother would say, "Martin, you cannot save everyone." But he would reply, "If I can save at least one, it will be worth it." This desire to help others marked his life from the beginning and only grew over time. At the age of 15, he was forced to join the Roman army, following the family tradition. Although he did not desire this path, Martin accepted his fate with surprising serenity. However, his heart continued to guide him toward another destiny, one he did not fully understand yet. During the marches, while his companions spoke of battles and conquests, Martin remained silent, immersed in his thoughts. His friends would often joke, "Martin, you seem more like a monk than a soldier." And perhaps they weren't entirely wrong. His time in the army would be brief but pivotal. It was during this period that he experienced one of the most significant moments of his life, his encounter with a beggar in Amiens. The story of Martin and his cloak is one of the most beloved legends of Christianity, an example of charity that would inspire generations. Unknowingly, this act of compassion would be the start of his spiritual transformation, the first step on his path to sainthood. That night, after giving half of his cloak to the beggar, Martin had a vision that would change his life forever. In his dream, he saw Jesus Christ wearing the half of his cloak that he had shared. Jesus said to him, "What you have done for this poor man, Martin, you have done for me." He woke up with a pounding heart, realizing that he had found the purpose of his life. From that moment, he decided to follow the path of faith and serve others, no matter the cost. The decision to leave the army. The vision of Jesus deeply impacted him. He could no longer remain a soldier in an army that promoted war and violence. For weeks, Martin meditated on his decision, knowing that leaving everything would not be easy. He knew that by quitting the army, he would face not only disapproval from his family, but also possible punishment for desertion. But his conviction was firm. "I cannot fight in battles that destroy lives," he would repeat to his companions. In one of his last marches, during a conversation with an officer, Martin expressed his doubts. "Have you not thought about serving a cause greater than a flag?" he asked. The officer, confused, could only laugh. But for Martin, the decision had already been made. Upon arriving at his destination, he announced his desire to leave the Roman ranks. "I will serve in the army of God," he declared, causing disbelief among his superiors. Some of his companions tried to persuade him, arguing that his place was in the army, defending the empire. "You cannot leave like this," they told him. "The homeland needs men like you." But Martin responded serenely, "My heart belongs to God and the poor. That is the only cause I will fight for." Facing his unwavering determination, he was finally relieved of his military duties. His departure from the army was both an act of courage and faith. He left behind not only his armor and rank, but also the security and honor the army offered. However, what he gained was much more valuable, the freedom to follow his vocation. On his new path, Martin dedicated himself to monastic life, seeking the peace and closeness with God that he had always longed for. Monastic life, a path of peace and reflection. After leaving the army, Martin headed to Poitiers, where he had heard of a wise and pious bishop named Hilary. This bishop became his mentor and taught him the mysteries of the Christian faith, giving him the spiritual tools needed to strengthen his vocation. Martin began living as a monk, seeking a deeper connection with God through a solitary life. he spent his days in prayer and reflection, feeling that he had finally found the peace he had longed for. The first years in monastic life were a period of learning and transformation. He lived in a small cell, surrounded only by nature. The locals, hearing of his piety, began visiting him, seeking his advice and prayers. They would often say to him, "Martin, your words have the power to calm our souls." Though he was humble, he felt a deep joy in helping others with his words of comfort and wisdom. Over time, his reputation for holiness grew, and people came from all over to receive his blessing. However, Martin remained distant from vanity, always remembering his commitment to humility. He would say to himself, "I am only a servant of God." He often spent sleepless nights praying for the souls of those who suffered, both in body and spirit. This sacrifice strengthened his faith and prepared him for the trials that lay ahead. Martin lived in harmony with nature. It is said that animals would approach him without fear, as if they recognized in him pure goodness. One time, a large injured stag took shelter near his cell, and Martin gently healed and fed it until it was well again. This love for creation was a reflection of his deep spirituality and his connection with God's work. The years in solitude strengthened his character and gave him a deeper understanding of his mission. He knew that he was not there for himself alone, but to guide others toward God. Although he sought a quiet life, his humility and compassion caused him to stand out, and soon people began asking him to accept greater responsibilities in the Christian community. However, Martin preferred to serve in silence and humility, even though destiny had prepared a more important role for him: the beggar's miracle and Christ's vision. One of the most remembered episodes in Martin's life was his encounter with a beggar in Amiens. It was a cold, dark night, and the wind cut like knives. Martin, still a soldier, saw his companions hurriedly walking, ignoring the beggar who was trembling on the ground. Martin approached and, without thinking, cut his cloak in half, offering a part to the man to cover himself. "Take, brother," he said with a smile. "May God keep you warm." That same night, while he slept, Martin had an extraordinary vision. He saw Jesus Christ, surrounded by light, wearing the half of his cloak. Christ looked at him tenderly and said, "Martin, though you are not yet baptized, you have already done what a true Christian should do. What you have given to the poor, you have given to me." Upon waking, Martin felt a deep love in his heart and understood that God had given him a special mission. This vision was a turning point in his life. Martin decided to dedicate himself entirely to charity and helping the needy, and began to reflect on baptism and his conversion to Christianity. He shared his experience with his companions, and some mocked him, saying it was just a dream. However, those who knew him well knew that something had changed within him, and that this encounter with Christ had set an unquenchable fire in his soul. The news of the vision spread quickly, and the Christians in the region began to see him as an example of faith and dedication. Martin, though humble, understood the importance of his experience and committed himself even more to following the path of the gospel. "May my hands always be open to give," he would often say, and he kept his word, helping those in need whenever he could, regardless of the circumstances. Baptism and the confirmation of his faith. After his vision of Christ, Martin decided that it was time to receive baptism. He felt that the water of baptism would be a complete renewal of his being, a spiritual rebirth that would prepare him for his mission. He went to Poitiers, where he was welcomed by Bishop Hilary, who became his mentor and spiritual guide. Hilary, seeing the devotion in Martin's eyes, took him in like a son and prepared him for the sacrament. The day of his baptism was an intimate yet profoundly significant celebration. As he received the holy water, Martin felt an indescribable peace, as if all the burdens of his past had melted away. "Now I am truly a child of God," he thought. Hilary watched him with a smile, sure that Martin was destined for great things. From that moment on, Martin delved deeper into the mysteries of the faith, guided by the wise bishop. His life took on new clarity. He spent hours in prayer, meditating on the Gospels and seeking to understand God's will for him. he often shared his reflections with Hilary, who marveled at the depth of his faith. "Martin, you have a special gift," he told him one day, "a heart that sees God in everything." Martin, ever humble, replied, "I only wish to serve and love others as he did." The call to service, becoming a missionary. Martin, although living a life of contemplation and prayer, increasingly felt the call of God to serve outside the walls of the monastery. Inspired by Hilary's teachings and his own conviction, he decided to dedicate himself to evangelization. The region was still full of pagan practices, and Martin felt his mission was to bring the message of Christ to those who still did not know his love. Thus, he began visiting villages and hamlets, preaching the word and performing acts of charity. His travels were not easy. On many occasions he faced resistance from the locals, who saw him as a threat to their traditions. However, Martin was never intimidated. With his usual calm, he spoke to them of the peace and love of Christ, and little by little, he managed to gain the trust of the people. Some of his followers said he had a special way of reaching people's hearts, as if his words carried an invisible power that moved all who listened. During one of his travels, he arrived in a small village where the majority still worshipped pagan idols. He decided to stay and preach the gospel to them. "This man does not bring violence or condemnation," they whispered among themselves. "He only brings peace and hope." Slowly, some began to accept his message, and over time, the entire village converted to Christianity. This success solidified his reputation as an untiring missionary, willing to bring the faith to even the most remote corners. The miracle of the resurrection of the catechumen. One of the most astonishing miracles attributed to Martin is the resurrection of a young catechumen, a learner of the Christian faith who had died before receiving baptism. Upon hearing of the young man's death, Martin was devastated. "It cannot be that this soul remains without the light of baptism," he exclaimed, his heart full of sorrow. Without wasting time, he went to the place where the body lay and knelt in prayer. Martin prayed fervently, asking God to restore life to the young man so he could be baptized. The witnesses observed in silence, some with tears in their eyes, others with uncertain hope. After hours of prayer, Martin placed his hands on the lifeless body and, in a soft voice, said, "In the name of Christ, rise up and live." At that moment, the young man opened his eyes and took a deep breath, as if waking from a dream. The witnesses were astounded. Some fell to their knees, thanking God for the miracle, while others wept with joy. The young man, still confused, looked at Martin and said, "I saw a light and felt an immense peace." Martin, moved, baptized him immediately, giving him the sacrament he had longed for. This miracle became one of the most memorable stories of Martin's life and strengthened the faith of all those who witnessed it. After this event, the news of the resurrection spread quickly. People from all over came in search of Martin, eager to receive his prayers and blessings. Although he insisted that the true miracle was faith, many began to see him as a powerful intercessor before God. However, Martin remained humble, always reminding them that the power came from God and not from him. This miracle was a testimony to Martin's deep faith and his ability to trust in God's power during the darkest moments. His love and compassion toward the catechumen reflected his commitment to saving souls and bringing them to Christ. From that moment on, his reputation as a miracle-working saint grew, and the people began to venerate him not just as a bishop, but as a living saint. The conversion of the pagans and the destruction of the temple. One of the greatest challenges Martin faced was the mission to eradicate paganism in the region. During one of his pilgrimages, he arrived at a village where the people still worshipped idols and performed pagan rituals in an ancient temple. Upon seeing him, the inhabitants asked him to leave their land, but Martin, with his usual calm, said to them, "I have come to bring you the peace of Christ." Little by little, he gained the trust of the villagers, who, curious about his message, gathered to listen to him. With patience, Martin spoke to them about the Christian faith, about a God of love who did not demand human sacrifices or fear. "Our God is a God of peace, who invites us to love one another," he explained. Some began to accept his words, but others remained reluctant. Then Martin proposed a test to demonstrate the power of God. "If we tear down this temple and I am not harmed, you will believe that the true power is from God," he suggested. The villagers accepted the challenge, and Martin stood next to the temple. As the workers prepared the demolition, Martin remained in prayer, asking God to reveal the truth to them. When the temple fell, a miracle occurred. Instead of crushing Martin, the rubble fell all around him, without touching him. The witnesses were stunned, and one by one, they began to renounce their pagan beliefs, accepting Christianity as their new faith. The destruction of the temple marked a turning point in the life of the community. The old altars were replaced with crosses, and Martin became a respected and beloved figure. "This man is not like the others," the villagers said. "He truly represents God." From that moment, Martin was known not only as a missionary, but also as a destroyer of idols and a brave warrior of the faith. This event solidified his reputation as a holy man, willing to face any danger to defend the truth of Christ. Although he insisted that it was not his power but God's, everyone knew that Martin had unshakable faith, capable of moving mountains. His courage inspired many to follow his example and live a life of devotion and service to God. The miracle of the grapes, a testimony of divine providence. During one of his travels, Martin found himself in a region known for its vineyards. He had walked long distances and, exhausted, he felt an immense thirst. However, there was no water nearby, and the vineyards around him appeared dry and withered. With a sigh of resignation, Martin sat under a dead vine and closed his eyes, praying silently. "Lord, you know that I do not ask for riches or luxuries, just a little relief for this thirst," he murmured. Suddenly, he felt a gentle breeze and opened his eyes. To his astonishment, the vines, which had been dry before, began to fill with fresh and juicy grapes. Martin, amazed, understood that God had heard his prayer. He took some grapes, and as he ate them, he felt his thirst and fatigue fade away. With gratitude, he blessed the vines, thanking God for his infinite goodness and provision. When the locals learned of the miracle, they came to see the vines. "This man is a saint," they exclaimed, "for even nature obeys him." From that moment on, those vineyards were considered sacred, and many came to harvest grapes as a blessing. Martin, ever humble, reminded them that the true miracle was faith, and that God always provides for those who trust in him. This miracle became another testimony to Martin's faith and his closeness to God. The villagers saw it as a sign that Martin was protected and blessed by the Lord. Even after his departure, the vines continued to bear fruit, and the people considered the grapes a symbol of God's presence in their lives. The miracle of the grapes spread quickly and was remembered for generations. This simple act of divine provision showed everyone that God cares even for the smallest needs of his children. Martin, just like Christ at the wedding at Cana, showed that God's power knows no limits and that, in his infinite goodness, he always finds a way to take care of his people. The healing of the leper, an act of compassion. During his travels, Martin encountered many people suffering from illnesses and afflictions, but one encounter in particular left an indelible mark on his heart. One day, in a small village, Martin was approached by a man suffering from leprosy. His skin was marked by the disease, and the inhabitants avoided him, fearful of contamination. Despite the distance everyone kept from him, Martin looked at him with compassion and approached without hesitation. The leper, surprised by the saint's closeness, murmured in a broken voice, "Aren't you afraid to come near me?" Martin smiled gently and replied, "Do not fear, brother, for we are all children of God." Without hesitation, he extended his hands and embraced the man, a gesture no one else dared to make. The people around watched in silence, shocked and moved by Martin's act of compassion. Martin began to pray, asking God to heal the man and restore the dignity that the disease had taken from him. Gradually, the skin of the leper began to transform, regaining its healthy appearance and erasing the marks of the disease. The man, realizing his healing, broke into tears and knelt before Martin, thanking him through sobs. But Martin, with humility, raised him up, saying, "Give thanks to God, for it is He who has performed this miracle." The news of this miraculous healing spread quickly, and more people came to Martin seeking relief for their afflictions. Although he insisted that the true healing came from faith, many began to see him as a man with the power to intercede before God. This miracle not only restored the leper's health, but also strengthened the faith of all who witnessed it. From that moment on, Martin became a figure of hope and comfort for the sick. His ability to see each person as a brother and his courage to face suffering without fear made him even more beloved by the people. The healing of the leper was a proof of his boundless compassion and his commitment to God's work. The call to the episcopacy, the humility of the saint. As Martin's fame grew, many began to consider him the ideal candidate to lead the church in Tours. However, Martin was a humble man and did not desire power or honors. His life as a monk and missionary was all he needed, and he preferred to stay away from the responsibilities of ecclesiastical leadership. Yet, the clamor from the people was so strong that he finally accepted the proposal, though with great humility. On the day of his consecration as bishop, Martin arrived dressed in his modest tunic, avoiding any sign of pomp or vanity. The priests and the people eagerly awaited him at the cathedral, and when they saw him enter, some began to weep with emotion. "This man is a true servant of God," they whispered among themselves. Martin, with his head bowed, accepted the position with the commitment to serve and protect his people. As bishop, Martin distinguished himself by his simplicity and closeness to the people. Unlike other religious leaders, he lived in a small cell, rejecting luxuries and maintaining the austere life he had always led. When anyone came to him for help, he was always ready to listen and pray, no matter whether they were rich or poor. For him, every soul was equally valuable in God's eyes. One of his first acts as bishop was to visit the sick and the poor of the city. He walked the streets of Tours, offering blessings and words of comfort. "I am but a servant," he would often say, "and my duty is to care for you." This humble and compassionate approach earned him the respect and love of the people, who saw him not only as a bishop, but as a true saint. The acceptance of the episcopacy did not change Martin. On the contrary, it allowed him to extend his mission of love and charity even further. His life of service and humility inspired all those around him, and many priests began to follow his example, living more austerely and dedicating themselves to helping the needy. Martin's humility as a bishop became a testimony of his commitment to the gospel and his love for his community, the miracle of the rain, interceding for his people. During a period of severe drought, the region of Tours faced great despair. The crops were dying, and hunger was beginning to affect the population. The farmers, worried about the future, came to Martin, begging him to intercede for them before God. "Only you can help us, Holy Bishop," they said with tears in their eyes. Martin, moved by the anguish of his people, promised to pray for them. Martin withdrew to a quiet place and began to pray fervently, asking God to send the rain needed to save the crops. His prayers lasted for hours, and the people waited in silence, hoping for a miracle. Finally, when it seemed that all was lost, the sky began to cloud over, and a gentle rain began to fall over the fields. The water revitalized the plants, and the farmers, filled with joy, thanked God for the miracle. "It is thanks to Martin," they said. "His prayers have saved our lives." However, Martin reminded them that the true power came from God and that he was merely a humble servant. But the people knew that it was their faith that had made the miracle possible. The rain continued for days, and the crops fully recovered. This miracle became one of the most beloved stories of the saint, and whenever the region faced droughts or crop problems, the inhabitants would remember with gratitude the intercession of their bishop. To them, Martin was more than a leader. He was a protector who cared for their well-being and a man who lived his faith in every act. From that day forward, Martin's prayers were seen as a symbol of hope for the people. They knew that, no matter the difficulty, they could turn to him and find comfort and help. This miracle of rain solidified his role as the protector of Tours and reaffirmed his deep connection with God, a relationship that transcended the limits of human understanding. The vision of Jesus and the cloak, a message of compassion. Although this event occurred before his monastic life, the memory of the vision of Jesus with his cloak stayed with Martin throughout his life. Every time he remembered that moment, he felt a deep gratitude and renewed strength to continue serving. The image of Christ wearing the half of his cloak was, for him, a constant reminder that every act of compassion was, in reality, an act of love for God. Martin shared this story with those who doubted the importance of helping the needy. "What we give to our poorest brothers, we give to Christ himself," he would say, reminding them that every person, no matter their condition, deserved love and respect. For Martin, the vision of Jesus had not just been a miracle, but a fundamental teaching that guided each of his actions. During the winter nights, when he saw people in the streets, he would approach them and offer them some cover or food. Every gesture, no matter how small, was made with the intention of honoring that vision. "No one should be cold when we can share," he repeated. Thus, the story of the cloak became a symbol of his entire life, a life dedicated to compassion and to seeing the face of Christ in every person. This story spread throughout the region, and people began to remember Martin's act every time they saw someone in need. "Martin shared his cloak, and we too should share what we have," they would say. His example inspired others to practice charity, and many began to see the poor with a more compassionate eye, understanding that each person was a reflection of divine love. Over time, the story of Martin and the cloak became one of the most cherished legends of Christianity. It was a living teaching that faith is demonstrated through actions, and that true love makes no distinctions. Martin, though already a bishop and a saint to many, continued to remember that cold night in Amiens, where a simple act of generosity had shown him the true face of God. The miracle of protection against evil forces. One of the lesser-known aspects of Saint Martin was his confrontation with evil forces and his ability to expel demons. Martin had such deep faith that he could perceive the presence of evil and, with prayer and courage, confront it. Throughout his life, several witnesses claimed to have seen Martin confront evil spirits in people and places that required spiritual purification. Once, while visiting a village, the inhabitants asked for his help, claiming that their lands were cursed and that strange shadows stalked them at night. Martin, with his usual calm, told them, "The power of God is greater than any evil." Holding a crucifix in his hand, he walked through the lands, praying in every corner. At one point, he felt a dark presence trying to intimidate him, but he firmly exclaimed, "In the name of Christ, who conquered death, I command you to leave." Witnesses saw the shadows vanish, and peace returned to the place. The people, grateful, knelt before Martin, thanking him for freeing them. He, however, reminded them, "It is not my power, but that of Christ. You should thank him." From that moment on, the village began to live with renewed faith, and many converted, inspired by the miracle of protection they had witnessed. Martin frequently faced such spiritual challenges, and whenever he encountered any evil presence, he invoked the strength of God. For him, it was essential that his community lived in peace, free from fear of malicious influences. His courage and faith were such that even demons fled before him, knowing that Martin was fully protected by divine grace. This aspect of his life solidified his reputation as a spiritual protector and defender of the faith. People came to him not only for advice or healing, but also to ask for protection from any evil that might threaten them. Martin thus became a bastion of hope and safety, a true warrior of the faith who never feared confronting evil in all its forms. The importance of Saint Martin for the Church and for France. The life of Saint Martin of Tours left an indelible mark on the Church and the history of France. His example of humility, compassion, and courage made him respected and venerated not only as a bishop, but as a true saint. Through his deeds and teachings, Martin solidified Christianity in France, becoming a spiritual pillar for the country and its people. In every region he visited, his influence remained. Villages filled with hope, the needy found comfort, and those who doubted began to believe in the Christian faith. Years after his death, the veneration of him continued to grow, and his tomb in Tours became a place of pilgrimage, where people from all over the world came to ask for his intercession. For the Church, Saint Martin is a model of holiness and humility. His life showed that true greatness is not found in honors or power, but in selfless service to others. Many bishops and priests of his time were inspired by him to live simply and dedicate themselves to helping the poor. Through his example, Martin helped transform the Church, reminding everyone that the gospel is lived in acts of love and charity. In France, his legacy is immense. Saint Martin is considered the patron saint of the country, and his image is venerated in countless churches, where he is remembered as the protector of the poor and the defender of the faith. The Feast of Saint Martin, celebrated on November 11th, is of great importance throughout France, where his life is commemorated, and his example of generosity and love is remembered. His impact transcended his time and place, as his life inspired generations of Christians who, following his steps, dedicated their lives to helping their neighbors. Saint Martin not only changed the history of France, but left a legacy of faith that remains alive in the hearts of millions of people around the world. A life of holiness and a prayer to Saint Martin. The life of Saint Martin of Tours is a powerful testimony of what it means to live fully in faith. From his early days as a soldier to his last years as a bishop, every moment of his life was dedicated to serving God and others. He was a man who chose humility over power, compassion over indifference, and faith over fear. In every act, he showed that holiness is not a gift reserved for a few, but a call that anyone can answer. Today, his legacy remains alive, and many turn to him for intercession and comfort. Saint Martin continues to be a model of Christian life, reminding us that the true power of faith lies in love and selfless service. His story continues to inspire those who wish to live a life of charity and devotion, and his example is a guide for those seeking peace in a world full of challenges. The prayer to Saint Martin of Tours is a way to connect with his spirit and ask for his protection. Through this prayer, many find the strength to face their difficulties and renew their faith. Prayer to Saint Martin of Tours. Saint Martin of Tours, faithful servant of God and protector of the needy, we ask that you intercede for us before the Lord. You who lived a life of humility, love for others, and unwavering faith, help us to follow in your footsteps. Inspire us to be generous, to see in each person the face of Christ, and to live in peace and compassion. O glorious Saint Martin, defender of the poor and spiritual guide of France, protect us from all evil, strengthen our faith, and teach us to live in service and love. May your example light our path, and through your intercession, may we draw closer to the heart of God. Amen.